waggle it.
From the creator of Bull Durham and White Men Can't Jump.
The club head was waggle the club.
Comes a story.
That's a pretty girl that has such an ugly swing.
About men and women and the games they play.
Remember, this game's about trust, touch, and letting go.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and this is still, what's your name again?
Daniel Bergman, last time I checked.
New phone, who dis? I think you actually responded on Facebook, or responded to me on Facebook with that, so for something that we had exchanged a conversation about.
Quite possibly. I think that might have happened. Sounds like something that would happen to me.
Well, it's amusing, and it was contextually amusing as well, so that added to the experience. So, our last episode was The Princess Bride, and we've gotten some feedback. I did something a little bit different, and I know, Dan, I didn't clear this with you beforehand, but I took the liberty of going out into the universe to see what people thought about The Princess Bride before we recorded, and because of the response time recording schedule, we didn't get the responses until afterwards. So, I'm going to read to you now the response that we got, which was from William Sturdivant on our Twitter account. Yay, we have a Twitter account. And he said, one of the greatest movies of all time, which I think is, pretty fair in my opinion. I can't disagree with that.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you think that it's possibly one of the greatest movies of all time?
Well, I mean, considering that my comment stated that I think it's probably the perfect movie.
Yeah, then yes.
Then,
okay.
Yeah, I'd say that, in no uncertain terms, that I could probably say that overall it has to take that title of probably greatest movie of all time. I'll have to say that.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, on our Facebook page from listener Jeff, he said, loved the Princess Bride episode. I wish you had touched on Peter Falk a bit more. For me, he's always been the perfect gateway into this movie. And then he added some listener suggestions, Time Bandits, Romancing the Stone, Fried Green Tomatoes, and A Silent Running. And yeah, on the Peter Falk thing, I agree with that. I think he was an excellent part of the Princess Bride that probably doesn't get all the credit that he deserves. There were some other things that I, when editing the episode, thought that poop, I meant to say that, or I meant to add this. And one of those was actually a piece of trivia that the infamous Silk Road that existed on the dark web, if you're familiar with that.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that.
The originator went by the moniker Dread Pirate Roberts.
I do remember that, yes.
Yeah, I now wanted to make mention of it because not only is this the perfect movie or one of the greatest movies of all time, it has also influenced illicit activities, amongst other things. It's referenced in song and story, and apparently the...
And deep underground drug trade.
Exactly. And the funny thing was somebody took over that moniker after the original Dread Pirate Roberts gave it up or transferred it or something. So the legend goes.
Yeah, in the tradition of the movie that, the Dread Pirate Roberts is more than a title than an actual person and gets passed down, because who would surrender to a Dread Pirate Wesley?
Exactly. And that way you can retire your piracy. And then we also got some feedback from Robert Neese, listener Rob, I guess. I don't know if we want to attach the listener prefix to everyone, so we'll just call him Rob. We'll call him Canada Rob. Because he's from Canada. And I'll tell you, one, I already knew that, but I will expand on that in just a minute. So he thanked us for reading out his message, as we are wont to do with all of our listener feedback, as you're listening right now. And he said, "Ha, thanks for reading out my message. I'm just hoping the Browncoats don't organize a posse to come a-looking for me." And I told him that we got your back because we pretty much agreed with him. So he was kind of commenting on our thoughts about Firefly.
Yeah, my thing was like, wait, what? What are we talking about? What have I got back? You know, I was like, what did you get me into? Is what I'm thinking. Who am I defending and why? It's like,
yes, yeah. It's a worthwhile defense. Just follow me on that. You're good.
All right. But to respond to listener Jeff's thing about the Peter Falk thing, it's like, yeah, I looking back, there were actually a number of characters that we could have touched on a little bit more. But, like I said, it was just one of those movies I didn't want to turn into a quote fest. I didn't want to talk about cliches. And maybe just in that effort, people who should have gotten more mention got caught in the wave of like, oh, it's just, of course I'm going to, people are going to talk about Peter Falk because he was such a main prominent figure in the movie, which, like you said that, he doesn't quite get the attention that he should. I don't know. In my experience, he does. A lot of people talk about him and everything. So I thought it's like, well, he's been talked about enough. I try to talk about things that other people maybe didn't talk about as much. So,
well, I think in the scheme of the movie, he shows up throughout, but he's not Wesley. He's not Buttercup. He's not Fezzik. He's not Inigo Montoya. He's the narrator.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of people quote and talk about the movie itself or the story that he's narrating as opposed to the narrator. So, I don't know. I mean, it's my experience that he probably doesn't get talked about enough. If you're talking to people that are talking about him, then that's cool too.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, in face-to-face conversations, when they talk about the movie and it's like they like the aspect of, it's the grandfather telling the story and his narration. And, it's one of those things we were talking about, again, it being a perfect movie, him being the voice of the narrator. It's like you can't have anybody else. I mean, you can think of other people who might have fit that role, but you can go on with the rest of your life never knowing because you're just fine with Peter Falk, especially in this context, in this type of story.
Yeah, exactly. So we have actually received the trifecta of communication since our last recording. It's been some time. So I know Rob Neese left us a voicemail, an actual legit voicemail that's not selling us medical grade bracing. And I probably didn't talk about this last time because I was looking at the date stamps. I apologize, listeners. I know I have often said I will read all of our voicemails to you or let you play them. But yeah, I don't think anyone wants to hear over and over again how we need car insurance or warranties or medical grade braces. However, we have received 4 separate phone calls from the Norfolk Correctional Facility requesting our approval to allow an offender to call us in the future. To the listener that's making those calls, if you're legitimately trying to get in touch with us, we don't actually monitor this phone number, so being online to press 1 or 2 to say yes or no, respectively, I'm really sorry. I hope that you can find another way to contact us. And if it's just a wrong number because somebody keeps dialing the wrong number or they were given the wrong number, then you're not listening anyway, so it's okay. Maybe you'll hear this in the future. But we would appreciate if you tried a different method of communication, because if listening to this podcast changes your life, and Dan, that was yours, I'm giving you credit for that, then we're here for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's kind of interesting when you were telling us we were worldwide, that was one thing, but wow, that we're actually being listened to in the prison population. I don't know. I kind of like that idea that we might actually make somebody's life a little better.
Well, I hope we're making people's lives better in the first place, but I understand your point. And I do think that's kind of cool. I hadn't really looked at it from that perspective, so props.
Yeah.
But again,
we might turn somebody's life around. Might give them a vested interest in movies. You may do something with it.
Or he may go find some positive things to talk about and move forward with his life and decrease the negativity in the world. So, the power of podcasting.
Yay.
But on to our listener feedback from Rob in Toronto. Again, I already knew he was from Canada. That's right, I just said Canada. He said, and I'm going to read it because in the call he actually says you don't need to play this in the podcast, but one, I like reading the Google transcript because there's some interesting grammatical constructs in here that change the meanings of things, and I listened to the message, and Rob has what I would call slight Canadian accent from the stereotypes. Sorry, Rob, I love you. We're really happy you're providing us feedback, but I could hear the a boot and the hoose in there, so I not knocking it. I chuckled a little bit inwardly, so I was laughing with you. But he said, "Hey, Dan and Brian." Actually, he said, "Hey, Dan and Brian," because there are commas in there, so I inserted pauses. He said, "Hey, Dan and Brian Roberts, calling from Toronto, Canada. Here, first-time caller, a long-time listener. And listen, you don't need to play this in the podcast, but I was thinking about some constructive feedback that might kick it up a notch for your podcast. It seems like you guys know each other really well. You have been friends for years, your shipmates and all that. I think maybe before recording each episode, you could come up with some kind of questionnaire, like 4 or 5 questions, and then fill it out of once with your own answers, along things like, favorite line and best casting, worst casting, etc., and then also fill it out as you think that your co-host would and see how accurate your answers are to make for some funny banter, and you can see how well you really know each other. Sorry, I was running out of breath because it's the Google the Google text to speech just made that all one great big run-on sentence, even though it inserted commas where it didn't need to previously. So, I don't know, just worth of thought. Really been enjoying the show. That's wishes. So. And it says, that's wishes. I listened to the audio, and he actually says best wishes, and thank you for that. And he also ended with cheers, and I'm really sad that the Google didn't add that in there. So thank you for the feedback. Dan and I have actually been discussing it, and we are looking to implement it at a time when we can flesh out our plan for that. So we're not going to be doing or introducing it or incorporating it into this particular episode, but we're definitely looking at that and seeing how we can work it in as a thing, as a segment, as a part of the podcast. So thank you for that, and again, cannot thank you enough. Keep that feedback coming. Dan, Did you have anything?
No, I was say that's a lovely idea. Like I said, when we get into a movie that we're really enthusiastic about, get some planning and everything, we'll give that a shot. Appreciate the suggestion.
Absolutely. So, power to the listeners. All right, so this episode is about Tin Cup.
Yes.
And I don't want to be that guy, but the reaction to the selection, I think, kind of was a precursor to the, I don't want to say how we feel about this movie, but it was kind of one of those like, Tin Cup, huh? Okay. I think that was your reaction. So
yeah, so which really compels me to do this. It's like because I'm already it's not on my shelf and everything, so I'm just gonna go with it. I'm gonna ask the question that you usually ask of me: how did it end up on your shelf?
Strangely enough, I asked myself the same question because I was like, I don't even know why I own this maybe. So I did what every normal human does, or at least maybe not every normal human or every normal human who's been married for 20 years. But I asked my wife, I said, hey, why do we own this movie? Because I know it's not something that I would particularly go out of my way to get, unless I saw it for like a couple of bucks. I was like, yeah, all right, cool, whatever, sure, that's fine. It sounds like, at least from what my wife could recollect, was that it came in a 2-feature, like twin pack, like back-to-back 2 movies. And they were both Kevin Costner movies, and one Christy cares a great deal for. I enjoy it too, but I know that we got it because she really likes it, and that's Bull Durham and Tin Cup. So I think this was like, in the parlance of 45s, this was the B-side of Kevin Costner double feature, double pack. So I think that's how it got on my shelf. And if it's not, I'm sticking with it anyway because it's at least a more interesting story than, I don't know, somebody gave it to me. I don't remember. It's on my shelf, and that's all I need to know.
Yeah, it's funny that it's coupled with Bull Durham because I put in my notes and I'm like, this is essentially Bull Durham. It's almost
with golf, yeah.
Yeah, with golf instead of baseball. So it depends which sport you're more into. Because it's just like, yeah, down and out professional who could have gone all the way and been to the show or whatever, who probably was and didn't work out, and now he's living in some really backwoods town that nobody knows about or anything, and meets some woman who romances him, makes him better. Could he go to the show? It's like, yeah, it's very formulaic.
Yes, and there are a lot of sports cliches and just a lot of man-child forced to confront his inner demons, and his words, not mine, by somebody, by life, by another person or whatever. I think the difference between Tin Cup and Bull Durham is in Bull Durham, Kevin Costner's character was the more mature one that was trying to provide guidance to a younger version of himself that thought he had everything. He still had his flaws and everything, but he was not good enough to sustain a life in the show, as it were, in the bigs. And he was content with being, for the most part, the mentor, and then eventually I think didn't he become the coach of the team or go into managerial roles or something?
I don't remember.
It's been a minute since I've seen Bull Durham, but
it has been a long while.
Yeah. But in this movie, Kevin Costner's character is the layabout man-child that has to, sports cliche, win everything. It's either win or lose, and I don't know why this popped into my head, but I watch, I do watch NASCAR, and one of the things that they say, with that guy, it's either checkers or wreckers, and that's kind of their phrase for like, I'm either going to win this or I'm going to end up destroying the car, wrecking out, or dead last. Because in the, to quote Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last. So that's Kevin Costner's character in a nutshell in this movie. And I don't know. I mean, like, I think you said it already. It's one great big sports cliche after another.
More or less. Yeah, that was this movie. And, here's the funny thing. Is like when I went into this movie, again, not 100% enthusiastic about watching it. But I was kind of going in expecting to see a lot of older, chauvinistic type cliches, which either maybe I wasn't paying as much attention, but yeah, I didn't see a whole lot of that in there. So I'll give it that plus. I mean, yeah, a lot of man-child cliches, but maybe I'm just not seeing it with the right eyes or anything. But I didn't see some of that old archaic sexism that you see in a lot of other movies. That you look back and I'm like, wow, did I actually think that was funny at some time? But gladly, I didn't see too much of that here.
I don't recall. I know there was the one part initially in the movie where Kevin Costner's character meets Rene Russo's character, and he's bouncing the ball off a wedge while his posse, if you will, attempts to figure out a joke that I've heard of. It's more of a riddle than a joke.
I'm about to say a logic riddle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, she answers the question by intruding into the space, and then it's a matter of like, oh, you're a feminist. Like, well, that's not something I've ever had attached to me. That's not sexism per se, is more of just a conversation about it. But I would agree with that. I didn't see anything that was, particularly sexist. I mean, there was, Kevin Costner trying to get with Rene Russo's character through golf poetry, metaphors, and stuff like that. But I mean, I didn't think of it as anything more than sports cliche. This is going to be our love interest anyway, so he's got to try the ham-handed, artistic approach or whatever to, getting the girl, or at least getting her intrigued in him in the first place. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, probably the closest scene is when he's giving instruction, and he's the game's about touch and trust and this and that and everything, and yeah, he's a little forward, he's putting his hands on her and everything like that, but she didn't exactly previously or then say that she was objecting to it. So it could very well be a moment that they were both kind of getting into, in which case okay, consent's there. It hasn't been stated obviously that there is no consent or whatever, and so
Yeah.
again, it's just like, say, I was going into it going, oh, here we go, here's the moment, but then it's like, well, I guess no, it didn't happen,
So, like, can I ask you a question? I know this is slightly off topic, but when you watch movies, do you look for that specifically, or was it just because you were watching this sports cliche movie that you thought, oh, this is probably going to be in here, and you were surprised when it wasn't?
Like, if you're asking if I generally do that every time I watch a movie, no, not really. And
okay,
I mean, I go, like, especially when I watch a movie for the first time, I go in for the story. Okay, where's this gonna go? It's like if I go in to go see Avengers or stuff like that. Now, to qualify that, to show some comparing, it's like, yeah, I have heard a lot of people trying to talk about a lot of sexism or whitewashing or anything like that in, say, like Marvel movies. Which, okay, if I go in and looking for it and I say, yeah, I can see how they can say that. I don't agree, or I agree, whatever, but when I go in to watch it, I generally watch it for the story. Later on, I might watch it, with that in mind, to go, okay, people are saying this. Let me see. What did I miss? So for this particular time, I had seen it before years ago. I had seen Tin Cup in the Navy. Guys were like, it was one of those movie nights too. It's just like, I don't know, we've seen everything else. What about Tin Cup? I don't know. How bad can it be? So I had seen it before, and again, watching it and having, again, I don't mean to badmouth the movie. It wasn't a bad movie, but having like almost no interest in it. I had no investment in it. I decided to just look at other aspects and everything, and I said, well, this movie was made what year? The 90s?
96.
96. So, I said, okay, let's see if the little social portrayal is any different. I was basically, I'm looking for stuff to talk about.
Okay.
And again, it's just, like I said, I repeat myself in this sense, but it's a movie I didn't quite have a whole lot of vested interest in. So yeah, I was looking for something to talk about, and in that vein, I said, okay, let's look at it from this angle. Unfortunately, I didn't find much to talk about.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of had the same issue with not finding a lot of things to talk about, and interestingly enough, Kevin Costner was nominated for a Golden Globe for this movie. So, I mean, I don't know. It kind of actually reinforces what we'd said last time about movies with Best Director nods or Best Actor nods in some awards ceremony don't necessarily mean that I'm going to like the movie or that it's the best movie ever. It's just somebody somewhere thought that it was a decent movie and nominated somebody for an award. Doesn't mean I have to agree.
Yeah.
But looking at the IMDb ratings, we're not the only ones that are, I don't want to say lackluster about this movie, but not necessarily overly thrilled about it.
I mean, it's just, on the surface, it's a simple movie. I mean, it's just a regular person story. There's nothing extraordinary going on. There's no great conflict per se. It's maybe a rivalry between golfers, which, unless you're into golf, it doesn't really mean much to you. It's a rivalry that means as much to me as, like, rivalries in a dog show, I guess. I don't know if that's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I guess if you're into that kind of thing, but it's kind of like, again, sports cliche: two rival, golfers, or two rival basketball players, two rival boxers, two rival football players. I mean, insert conflict into the movie. I mean, this is, again, without getting cliche about saying cliche, if you could insert a sports cliche or find one that didn't exist in here, then you'd be doing better than I was, because I think I saw all of them. Now, to the golf part, I did specifically go out of my way to call my brother to ask him what he thought about this movie, because my brother is an avid golfer. He's no Roy McAvoy or David Sims, but he likes to go out and play golf, and it's something that he's gotten into in the last, I think, 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. And he's always looking for something to better his swing, and always looking for advice. And, he just likes to go out and have a good time playing golf. My nephew played golf in high school, and as a freshman, he was on the varsity team, and then eventually he became the captain of the team. And he's shot really, really well. He shot under par a few times, and my brother was telling me that for, I think it was 340 days straight, he was practicing like 5 hours a day, because, as Kevin Costner, Roy McAvoy, said in the movie, golf is a game of touch. It's a game of, figuring out the swing, and he did all the finger things and all that kind of stuff. So I figured talking to my brother would give me a little bit more insight into golf, and as to whether or not, in the same way we talked about My Cousin Vinny being a movie that lawyers refer to, is this the movie that golfers look at and go, yeah, it's not a great movie, but if you want to capture what, the spirit of golf is, yeah, watch Tin Cup. He didn't really say that so much. I mean, he actually recommended The Legend of Bagger Vance, and a movie that I'd never heard of called 7 Days in Utopia. He said those are the golf movies he watches. He has never seen Tin Cup from beginning to end. So, but it's on the Golf Channel all the time, so he knows that if he wanted to, he could. So, maybe it's kind of I don't know, it's always on. I figure I can watch it whenever I want.
Yeah, I figure though, if you're a golfer, it's like, hey, it's just somebody made a movie that's featuring your pastime. I think it's just exciting enough, so it'll show up on the channel at least a few times, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know, it was kind of one of those, like I said, he liked Bagger Vance. He said that was the best one, and that was about his input. But what I did get from him was a screenshot of a conversation that he had with my nephew, and he had asked him, because of the two, I think my nephew is the much better golfer and had much more of the competitive side in him, because he was playing on a team, playing for his high school and that sort of thing. So he had texted him, and then my brother sent me the screenshot, and Parker, that's my nephew's name, he liked Tin Cup. He said it is a good one, and his favorite part of the movie was when he breaks all of his clubs trying to get over the water. So if you recall that scene, that is my nephew's favorite scene. And I sent my brother a text back and said, awesome, that's getting included in the podcast, and here it is. But that begs the question, I suppose, if I'm using that turn of phrase correctly, what was your favorite part of the movie?
You're asking me? Yes. I don't know if I have a favorite part of the movie. I mean, to tell you the truth, I was just trying to get to the movie. I mean, okay, so I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, you're talking to your relatives who play golf, who are in the know of the game and everything like that, and what they thought about it and everything. And he said he likes the other golf movie. Mm-hmm. Which is like, okay. And me just trying to get to this movie, it didn't strike me as a movie that was made for golfers. It just happened to have golf in it. And what I mean by that is that let me examine another movie about another subject that apparently was a love letter to the subject, which is I don't know if you ever see the movie Chef.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it.
So Chef, which is starring Jon Favreau and a lot of the cast of Iron Man, which is funny because like Robert Downey Jr. makes an appearance and everything. But to me, that was made by somebody who likes cooking, if not loves it. There were scenes in there that shows that, where he's cooking a grilled cheese sandwich. And it's like, yes, this movie is a love letter to cooking. And I felt that. Because, I mean, yeah, there's another story where he's a chef, disillusioned, leaves the restaurant business, decides to open up a food truck, everything. But on the background of it, there's this whole love of cooking, and I felt that. I'm not a cook. I don't watch cooking shows or anything. I like to cook a little bit, but I'm not really into it. But I really felt that in this movie. I'm saying the same would have happened if this was a love letter to golf, but there wasn't. There wasn't a whole lot of scenes that showed that he really appreciated the game of golf, that he loved it, that it was his life. And so
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't let you finish.
no, it's just like those scenes. It just didn't strike me as a whole love letter to the sport. I mean, yeah, there were establishing shots that said that, yeah, he was a great golfer, that he can do these amazing shots, and that he knows what he's talking about. But there weren't scenes to make me feel that way. If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I kind of disagree with you because I think that living on a golf course or on a golf driving range and all the stuff that he did maybe didn't necessarily drive home his love of the game, but I think his down and out sort of story when Don Johnson's character comes up and offers him the caddying job, and he was like, "Oh, I get to play," and then the initial disappointment of finding out that he just wants him to be his caddy, and then he takes the job anyway because he needs the money or whatnot. I think they did a decent job. I'm not going to say great, but maybe I think that they did a little bit better job than you did. I read it a little bit differently. I think they, implied that golf was this big deal, but again, golf was the mechanism by which they got to the romance. So
yeah,
it was, again, the scene. It was a scene holder, but it wasn't necessary because, like you said, it could have been anything. It could have been baseball. Like you said, this is, kind of the same story as Bull Durham. So
yeah, but and that's the thing though. It's like, yeah, when he says, "Oh, I get to play and everything," again, I didn't feel the same kind of love. I mean, it was definitely the thing we keep talking about, the show me versus tell me. And in that thing, he's just telling me, "Oh yeah, I love golf." In the opening, and we talk about establishing shots a lot. And I remember it was my cousin Vinny. It's amazing that it could have been places in California that they were actually shooting, but it was there to make us believe that it was the Deep South. Mm-hmm. Because when people think of California, they think of Los Angeles, San Francisco. They don't think of San Bernardino, which looks like the Deep South.
Yeah, or Redding, or anywhere in Northern California.
Yeah, so these establishing shots for this movie were showing us what was supposed to be, some out-of-the-way area in Texas. And again, it doesn't strike me as he's there because he wants to be closer to the golf game. He wants everything to remind him. I mean, the whole golf resort is just there as a consequence because somebody thought, "Oh, look, here's some land. I'm going to put a golf thing here," and this is just where he ends up. So that doesn't show me that this is a love letter to golf. It just shows me that's where he ended up because, well, what other choice did he have?
I'm going to agree with you on that because there was nothing in the introduction that said after doing X and so amount of golf, he's just, I think I'm saying that wrong. It's just sort of they talk about how he played golf in college. And usually when one plays golf in college, you're between 18 and 22-ish. And then he went on to the PGA Academy or whatever to see if he could qualify for that, which I assume again happened at, a younger age or whatnot. And in this movie, I'm assuming he's mid-30s, and they don't really tell you what happened in the intervening 10 years except to say he's at this driving range. And I think filling that out with, he tried his hand at the Pro-Ams or, did something where he was out playing golf all the time. It was just, he's the golf pro at a driving range, and there's no real background as to how he ended up there. So, yeah, I can see your point about them not showing his love for golf because it doesn't seem like he did any golfing in the meantime.
Yeah, it was always either because he was bored, which was the opening shot. It's like, yeah, okay, you see him doing it, but it's because there was nothing else better to do, or he's doing it for his business or for advancing the plot.
See, now, the whole him out there on the driving range thing, I didn't think he was doing it because he was bored. I can understand, and again, it's a sports cliche. Have you seen the Scott Bakula movie? Came out in the mid-90s, probably around the same time, called Necessary Roughness?
Oh, yeah, I do remember that one.
It's the same thing. It's an older guy that's didn't get to do the thing that he loved, so he just does the thing as much as he can. So, maybe it kind of showed that, but it didn't. I don't think it really conveyed it as well as it could have. I mean, Necessary Roughness kind of did, kind of didn't as well, but I think that movie did a much better job of showing Scott Bakula's character's love for the game of football than this one necessarily did for Kevin Costner's character's love for the game of golf.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. That Necessary Roughness had a better portrayal of the character's love of the game. And the thing is, like, the difference is, I don't know if I can articulate it well enough. I mean, because, in that movie, correct me if I'm wrong, they established his love for the game because, he was living on a farm, and he had built a thing where he just kept throwing a football into a tire. And they showed him doing that over and over again.
Yeah, it was more than a tire. It was an actual receiver. I mean, there was a jersey on there, and he just kept throwing it into the numbers, and it was one of those, I guess, tackling dummies, but it was on a spring, and when he nailed it from, 50 yards or something, the thing went over about 3/4 of the way or something, showing that he had, a significant velocity on the ball and still had his accuracy and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, again, it's like that did a better job of establishing, yeah, this is a guy who had a passion for it and he missed it or whatever. It's just something that he really loves. But in the beginning of Tin Cup, again, you see a bunch of guys taking bets on which fly is going to get zapped by the bug zapper, and he's the lone guy on the driving range just putting balls. And again, that didn't strike me as somebody who was who took time out of his day because it's like, oh, I really love golf, so I'm going to go do this. No, it just looked like a bunch of guys hanging out, and that's what he was doing.
Well, I think what they could have done, and I'm going to correct you, one drives balls on a driving range, one putts on the green.
Yeah, okay.
But that's semantics, and I'm just being pissy. I think if they'd added a couple of lines about, yeah, now he just spends his days all day, every day on the driving range and playing golf or something, something I don't want to necessarily be told, but I would like either through maybe a few extra seconds of introduction, show him playing golf more than just whacking balls in the driving range, because there's a ton more to golf than how far you can drive it. It's not about that. It is really, like the man said, it's about touch. I mean, I've played golf. I don't really care for the game a whole lot, but I get it. I mean, I understand the fascination as with any other thing that people are fascinated with. I'm like, hey, that's your thing. Go have fun. Don't annoy me with it, but, have fun. Have a good time. I'll come with you. A friend of mine comes down from Illinois. In fact, Justin, our guest on the Ghostbusters episode, he comes down to this area every now and again, and we'll go out and play a round of golf. Like, look, I'm not a huge fan, but it's a good time. We shoot the breeze, we, whack the ball. I usually end up going to Walmart and buying a bag of 36 disposable balls because I'm going to lose them at some point. and he brings like 10 balls and he plays really well and he's concerned about his swing and he knows I'm not, and we just have a good time. So, I get what you're saying. There was not a real point where they said that this was his all-consuming passion. It was just sort of it was, and then he got stuck here, and it was just kind of it was almost like a thing that was mocking him because he lived in the Winnebago on the edge of a driving range, and his caddy was his best friend, or his former caddy, or his best friend was a caddy. Wasn't really sure how all that worked.
Yeah, it's like if I'm going to armchair quarterback this one, again, using the sports analogies there. Personally, if I wanted to establish that this was a passion of his, that it was, I don't know if the right word is all-consuming of his life or whatever. But, if his friends were doing something that was maybe a little bit more interesting to the general populace who would be watching this movie, if they're, I don't know, watching something on television that everyone can relate to. They're watching the Super Bowl or something like that, but nope, he's out on the driving range because that's what he likes. Maybe that would have been establishing more. So, and just to make comparisons.
Yeah, but again, I think that goes to the sports cliche in any movie where you've surrounded yourself with a bunch of hangers-oners who are just excited to know somebody who, loves the game. Like, oh, the golf pro's my friend or whatever. And it's a place for people to hang out. And I mean, not to denigrate the other characters in the movie, but it's not as though they seemed like they were having significant life success either. They were just, hey, this is what we do in West Texas. We bet on which fly is going to hit the light or hit the bug zapper first. We hang out at the crappy driving range in Salome, Texas, population 500, and we also have a strip bar that our pro golfer was dating, or our golf pro, not pro golfer, was, dating the owner of, or whatever. We don't know where his money troubles came from. He said he was having some issues with the IRS. He owed his ex-girlfriend $12,000. I don't recall that they specifically explained why, but, there just seemed to be a lot of things that Kevin Costner's character made a significant series of bad choices. And I get that, but again, that could have been any high school, college sports star that didn't achieve their dream until Rene Russo came along and started being a sports therapist. If you catch that, where I'm going with that. Until some catalyst came in and said, hey, that used to be your dream and now it's not. What happened? Why are you stuck here? Wait a minute, I don't need to be stuck here. I just don't think that this movie did a fantastic job of drawing that out. But again, I don't think that it had to, because really the conflict was about the romance, and we've already talked about that. Or we've already pointed that out.
Yeah, I don't know how to segue off of that one.
But speaking of Rene Russo, I will say, and I don't usually say things like this, but I have a thing for Rene Russo. I can't explain it. I just think that she is a great actress. I like most of the things that I've ever seen her in, and even the movies that I didn't like, I liked her in. And she has a certain, I don't want to say spunk, it's just kind of she has a certain quality that's, it's hard to pin down, where you're like, oh, well, I like her. She's okay. She just lends herself to the trusting sort of broken characters that she plays, or as in the Thor movies, she plays a regal character quite well. I mean, she does present herself in a way that you're like, oh, I should probably pay attention to her. And in this movie, you kind of have to, because she's, the romantic center pin, if you will, of the romantic triangle, which is ironic because it's not really a triangle. It's not as though Kevin Costner and Don Johnson were trying to get together. So, the romantic V, if you will.
Yeah. Again, like, with this movie, it's like I really couldn't get into the romance part either, because it was almost the the typical formula for romantic comedies. Guy with no chance gets a chance, wins the girl. Even it's like I was thinking, well, is Don Johnson going to be an okay guy that you're going to feel bad for? No, he turns out to be a total jerkwad that you have absolutely, no sympathy for. So it's like, yeah, you deserve what you get.
Insert cliche here. But, it's interesting because I was looking at IMDb, trying to figure out where this movie fell into the careers of the three primary actors in the movie. And for Rene Russo, I think the thing that she did before this was, well, she was in Major League 2, but I think the biggest thing that I remember her in before this was In the Line of Fire, but really Lethal Weapon 3. And I mean, she's got a great body of work, a lot of movies that I've seen her in, and I like seeing her in movies. I agree, this movie was not particularly great at conveying the romance. It was just a movie that hit all the tropes. It fired on all cylinders in that aspect. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm selling the movie a little bit short. I mean, there's a reason these tropes exist. I just, again, this movie went, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Bloop, 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 bloop. And then it got made. For Kevin Costner, this was between Waterworld and The Postman. And I arguably two of the movies that really kind of they didn't put a fork in there, but they really knocked his career down. Waterworld was not terrible in my opinion, but it was a box office dud. And The Postman, again, not a terrible movie, but not exactly well received at the box office. I think they were, for most audiences, a little slow and a lot long. And if you're going to have a slow movie, maybe not make it 3.5 hours long. And Kevin Costner has a long history of playing, or rather starring in offbeat movies, in the sense that, he doesn't tend to do the same thing every single time. I mean, I don't know. He definitely has a thing for sports movies. I give you that. Or I give him that. Field of Dreams. This one. Whatever this one's called. What's this one called again? Oh, yeah, Tin Cup.
Are we that not into the...
No, I was just kidding. No, he's got, Field of Dreams, Bull Durham, Tin Cup, For Love of the Game. He definitely does the sports cliche movie. Interestingly enough, his 3 baseball movies are from different aspects of baseball. 1 is a fan. 2 is as a less, there is more of a mentor kind of thing, not necessarily self-absorbed. And then For Love of the Game is, a decent pitcher, in the bigs towards the end of his career. And that one's told in flashbacks. I like For Love of the Game. I think it's a great movie. We own it. It'll be on the list at some point.
I was about to say, I've never seen it, so if that ever shows up, then yeah, it'll be a first time.
Yeah, but this one's, kind of in the, like, in between. If you're talking about the development of a sports character, this one fits, ironically, between Bull Durham and For Love of the Game, because this is not the I've achieved something and then gotten knocked down. He never, in this movie, Roy McAvoy did not achieve his PGA Tour dreams. He gave into his ego and tried to do the things instead of recognizing that playing it safe is sometimes the best thing. So this movie, aside from the romantic comedy, is also about checking your ego and saying, look, just because you can make it doesn't mean you should make it. Like in reference to the shot during the U.S. Open and, hitting the water and that sort of thing. But it's also, that's what kept him from getting to the PGA Tour in the first place. And maybe he wasn't ready for that at the time. Okay, I will say, obviously he wasn't ready for that at the time. But sometimes having a therapist, even though it was your romantic interest and that sort of thing, helps clear the mechanism, to borrow the phrase from For Love of the Game. And one of the takeaways from this, in a weird kind of totally unrelated into the movie kind of way, is sports therapy is a booming industry because there's so many top level athletes that don't know how to get out of their own heads. It's funny, when I was talking to my brother, I started talking about TED Talks. And if you're familiar with TED Talks, it's Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Is that really what it stands for? Yes. Anyway, they have TED Talks about clutch performance and how people get into their own heads. And that's something that you see in this movie during the first round of the U.S. Open, where he shoots an 83, and then, the next day he's, shooting the course record. The first day he was in his head and he couldn't get out. But that's what sports therapists do. They teach professional sports athletes, people, to be in the moment and not focused on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, or to, not be beaten down by, one bad swing or, one bad throw or whatnot. So I thought that was kind of interesting because that gave Rene Russo's failing psychotherapy business a shot in the arm, and it got to keep our two little lovebirds connected when Roy McIlroy decided he was going to, go play on the PGA Tour.
Mm-hmm.
Yay, Dan! Thanks for participating. Woot woot!
No, it's funny. You talk about that sports therapy is a thing and everything, and I it just made me think, like, when I was struggling to find something to talk about, I was looking in the trivia section on IMDb, and it just was like, wow, this stuff's really interesting. If I was into golf, there's just a lot of it. I don't know if you looked in the trivia section. Yeah, a lot of it dealt with, like, oh yeah, that particular person in this scene was really a golfer, some famous golfer, and so was this guy, and it's just like, yeah, that's nice, that's great. It's like, and I'm not taking away from that, because if you are into golf and everything like that, then yeah, that is incredibly exciting. And that's probably the same way people feel about, it's like, oh yeah, in this Godzilla movie, that actor who shows up who's running away, that was the same guy that was, and it's like, yeah. And it's like that people probably look at me in that way and say, yeah, who cares? And that's the thing. I'm not saying I don't care. Well, I am saying I don't care, but I'm not saying it's like nobody should. I'm just saying it's just not my thing.
Yeah, but it's the same thing as any other fandom. It's a thing that people are into, and so I think I just said the same thing you just did. So I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Hey, you're into your thing, I'm into mine. Like, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, that whole scene where he continually shot the ball and it went into the water. Apparently, that really was something that happened in some other golf game and everything. So, okay, that's cool. Life imitating art or art imitating life. You decide.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, it wasn't based on a true story. It was just they incorporated a thing that actually did happen. But
I was gonna say, which lends a little bit to the believability and you being able to watch this movie and say, yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, that was actually a thing that happened. Yada, yada, yeah. One of the interesting pieces of trivia, and I actually caught it, although I didn't know what race it was, but the bar scene where Rene Russo comes in and says, I'll bet you $200 or whatever that he can knock this through here into the, over the patio, over the grass, into the river, and knock that pelican off of its perch, blah, 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 blah. That whole thing. Shows you how interested I was in the movie conception, as a process. I actually started looking at what was on the television in the background, and it was a NASCAR race. And I think I opened up the podcast was saying, I watch NASCAR, it's a thing. The race that they were showing was, well, at the time it was the Winston Cup, but it was a Cup Series race. It was the Varsity League as opposed to what at the time was referred to as, I believe, the Busch Series, which was, the younger recruitment drivers, that sort of thing. It's like the minor leagues of NASCAR. And I looked and said, well, wait a minute. That race isn't on that day. Like, no, this is only Friday. They wouldn't be having that race on a Friday. Maybe a Saturday, but it would be a night race, and it's not night, so what the hell? Like, they got the wrong race on. And sure enough, as I was looking at IMDb, that's one of the trivia things, where they mentioned the specific race that it is. I'm like, oh, well, that's the, Southern 400 or whatever, and that, that wouldn't have been on that day because that's in August. I didn't really get down to that level. I watch NASCAR because I like when they pull up the computer graphics or the cutaway cars, and they do like the aerodynamics and they do all the physics and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. It's, a lot of science goes into this. And, this car's making left turns for the most part. So, I watch it because it's on, really. I mean, I used to have a driver. I followed him like, yeah, that's my driver. And then he retired. And I'm like, yeah, it's really just not the same. I don't have a driver. None of these really speak to me. Because a weird story that has nothing to do with golf, everything to do with NASCAR. About 11 or 12 years ago, I was watching NASCAR on the television. And it was the Richmond race. And for our listeners, Richmond, Virginia is about an hour and a half from my house. I've actually been up to the race a couple of times. Once was for a volunteer thing. We were selling concessions at one of the concession stands to raise money for the organization I was involved in. And once was because I got free tickets and went up to the race. It's usually in the middle of September, and we went up there, and it's a good time. When I was in Memphis, stationed in Memphis and Millington, there was a 8th mile dirt track, and we would go down there on Friday nights and, have a little barbecue, do a little tailgating, and then go watch the races. And we'd, bet beers on which car we didn't know would end up being in first place or whatnot. So it was just fun. It was kind of a social thing. Well, the first race that I watched with a bunch of people that were really into NASCAR, we were sitting there, it was on the TV, and it was the September Richmond race, and the race had a Warner Brothers theme to it, so they had Marvin the Martian, Bugs Bunny, some of the Warner cartoon characters on the cars. And they said, well, you have to pick a car. Like, you have to pick a driver. I'm like, I do? Like, oh, okay. It's like, yeah, which one are you going to pick? Well, I watched the cars for a couple of minutes, and the number 55 car, which was normally driven by Sterling Marlin, was being driven by Greg Biffle. And they tell you all that. But the other reason I picked the car was because it had Marvin the Martian on it. And I'm a big Marvin the Martian fan. So I was like, all right, I'll take the Marvin the Martian car. They're like, all right, well, that's your driver now. Like, okay, cool, whatever. And it was afterwards that I found out, like, oh, okay, so that's my driver now? I have to pick that guy every time? Like, yep. Well, the next year was his rookie year, and he drove with one of the racing teams in the same car or whatever for 10 years, and then he just retired. Like, nope, made enough money, whatever, I'm good, I'm done. And after that, I kind of lost interest. Not that it was ever a thing. I'm like, oh my God, I lose sleep if I don't watch the race. But, I'm like, all right, it's Sunday, it's race day, whatever. And for me, it's kind of like in between football seasons, it gives me something to do on Sunday while I'm doing laundry, because I do the laundry on Sunday. So anyway, So Greg Biffle was my driver, and I picked him because he happened to be driving in the car that had Marvin the Martian on it. So, and then I found out later that he was from about 70 miles west of my hometown. I was like, oh, see, even better. Yay, local boy. And then, like I said, when he quit, I was like, oh, I lost what interest I significantly had in it, which wasn't a whole lot, again, except for the sciencey bits. And now it's just a thing that's usually on Sunday. Christy will take what she calls her NASCAR naps, which is like, oh, well, the green flag is dropped and Darrell Waltrip has said, boogity, boogity, boogity. So, yeah, I think I'll take a nap. Let me know if there's a wreck or when the race is over. So, that's my NASCAR fandom. But that was the only reason I noticed that there was a race on in the background and it was on the wrong day. Which brings it right back to Tin Cup. And I don't know how to segue out of this except to say Cheech is in this movie.
Yay!
Which is a weird transition, but you get what you get. I like Cheech Marin.
Marin.
I believe that's how you... Marin? Is it Marin?
Cheech,
okay.
Cheech Marin. At least that's I've
heard it pronounced both ways.
My Hispanic friends pronounce it that way. I'll take them as authority over on that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. But I like him. It's funny because he and Tommy Chong have had such different careers. Cheech seems to have gotten out of the stereotype, and Tommy Chong embraced it for the most part of of Cheech and Chong from back in the day. But yeah, I think most of the movies that I've ever seen, movies or shows that I've ever seen him in, I love him. I have a great time in whatever movie he's in.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing him and stuff, and I like the fact that he's still out there, working, doing stuff.
He's the one of those actors that can really play to an ethnic stereotype and not make it cringy.
Yes.
Because I mean, there's some actors, and I get it. I mean, I remember watching this thing about Gabriel Iglesias, how he was struggling to just, play a funny character, and they just, we just want you to add some spice. We want you to add, all these little euphemisms that they would say and everything, and then finally he just played up the Hispanic, like, orale, it's like, that's what we want, it's like, and yeah, that's frustrating, but Cheech, for somehow, I don't know, just his chemistry or something like that, he can play up to it, and it doesn't seem cringy, and I admit, people may have other opinions of that, but I mean, for me, he makes it work.
Yeah, I think he knows when to dial it up and when not to. And, it just, everything you see him in, and I was flipping through IMDb, looking at all the stuff that he's done. Sometimes he plays a straight, could have been any race person. It just happens to be Cheech playing it, and it gives it a little bit of flavor, but he's not dialing up the stereotype. And he's not dialing it back. He's just, playing the character and rolling with it. And yeah, sometimes that's the director or, whoever saying, hey, do this, do that. But when he needs to dial it up, he does it well. And I'm always entertained. And when he doesn't, I'm still entertained. So yeah.
Yeah.
I like Cheech.
Just one other actor too that I want to bring up. It's one of those that guy that was in that thing type of actors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking him up here on IMDb because obviously I did not know his name. His name's Rex Lynn.
That's funny.
He was the guy with the mustache among his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to see him in this. He's one of those faces I've seen before in movies. I'm like, yeah, there's that guy that was in that film. He always played just a real asshole in other movies. I mean, he was kind of like the secondary villain in Cliffhanger. And looking at his filmography, a lot of things he plays, like a cop who's just there. He just helped to support and move the plot along. And invariably, he's always just some guy who's kind of, whether he's on your side or not, but he's always kind of standing in your way type of character. And it's funny to see him play an entirely different role of just, the hangout guy. He's hanging out and taking bets on flies.
Because somebody's got to do it.
Because somebody's got to do it. Well, and I always like that. I always like to see when you have an actor who's usually typecast in a particular role because of the way he looks or whatever, and you see him play something that's a little lighter, a little outside of character. I tend to enjoy that, so I'll give that to this movie. They had him in here doing that.
Yeah. I know we seem to have fixated on this whole bug zapper thing. I have a couple of questions about that scene, and I don't know why this occurred to me, but it did. One, there were a lot of bugs around there. How could he tell that was his bug? I mean, it's not like he stopped and tagged it. And if you watch the scene, he takes his eyes off it a number of times. So, I mean, I didn't understand how exactly one was supposed to win this, but okay, cool. But on the flip side of that, oh, go ahead.
It's just one of those, just accept it.
Yeah, push the button. But on the other side of that, have you ever been so bored that you've come up with dumb games like that?
Absolutely. You were in the Navy. Really? Do you have to ask that question?
I wasn't asking because I didn't think that you had. Again, kind of goes to what Rob Oakville edition, Rob Canadian Rob? What were we calling him? I've forgotten. That's okay. Rob, what he had said about how well do you know your shipmate? I'm like, oh yeah, I know you've done it. I mean, that was low-hanging fruit. That was an easy question. I just was kind of curious to hear what kind of things you did do to entertain yourself during the boring times.
We used to make up games like the L's of life. And it's just like, what are the, it's just basically come up with really cool things that start with the letter L.
Lava.
Like Lamborghinis, legs,
llamas.
Just silly things that 20-something-year-old kids or stuck on a submarine would do, It's just...
Yeah. Breathing recycled farts. I could see where that would come up.
Yeah, exactly.
But you said 20-somethings, and usually that's a lot more lower 20s than upper 20s. Again, I go back to how old were these guys? They had to have been in their 30s, right? I mean, it was at least 10 years later. David Sims, Don Johnson's character, had a pretty good pro golf career established, enough that he could have his own invitationals. So I wish they would have expanded a bit more on all of the things that went wrong in Roy McAvoy's life to get him to where he is now. Like, oh, remember that time you bet $40,000 on whether or not someone would sink a putt or whatever? I mean, something that ties his bad choices back to golf. More so than he just had to try and hit this ball onto the green 6 times in his last round at the PGA Academy or whatever. I don't know. Like I said, this movie wasn't terrible. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever watched in my life. It was a movie. It existed in the universe, and I'm not better for having seen it. I'm not worse for having seen it. I thought that there were some things I liked, some things I didn't like, and I really don't know what else to say about it. It exists, and that's it. Yeah,
I mean that's pretty much that's all I gotta say about that.
Gen A. Oh, wrong one. Did he play golf? I don't think anyway.
He played ping pong.
Yes. I will say, going back to the question that I had asked you earlier to answer it for myself, my favorite scene, and I think most people remember this, which is probably why it's my favorite scene, was when he goes out and plays golf with the garden implements to raise money to get his golf clubs back.
That was entertaining.
But again, if that's the height of your entertainment, then maybe I just don't love golf enough to have gotten too into it. It's a thing.
I will say that I did laugh at the scene when he made the bet with Don Johnson about how far he can hit the ball. And the little trick of hitting it on the pavement and making it roll further. Okay, got it. Got to be humble.
That's that outside of the box thinking.
I wouldn't have thought about that.
I tend to think linearly for the most part, so like you have established that this is about distance. That's how we measure distance, by the numbers. So I don't know. I have other, off the wall thought processes, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that, or rather, I think we've talked about some good things, we talked about some bad things, and there was one other thing that really struck me. And again, I think it goes to how not present I was watching this, in the sense that, like, oh my God, I'm really engrossed. But one of the things that drives me insane is when characters who are supposed to be reasonably well educated mispronounce commonly easily pronounced words. And I know maybe I'm just making a big deal out of it. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. But when Kevin Costner and Rene Russo go down to the river, and he tells her, well, it ain't no Rio Grande. Like, dude, you're from Texas, or at least you live in Texas, and you've lived in Texas for a good long time. You're college educated, which I tend to input a certain degree of, ability to speak to. I mean, if you catch what I'm saying, I usually infer that means that you have the ability to use words to a certain degree, and would understand that there's a correct way to pronounce a word and an incorrect way. And Rio Grande is not it, especially if you're in Texas. I mean, I've always called it the Rio Grande. I suppose, the correct, Spanish pronunciation is the Rio Grande, but not Rio Grande. And I don't know why, but that just reached in and poked me right in the freaking ear holes. I was like, ugh, I hate that. So, but yeah, that was actually just a thing that I thought of. I know I had an emotional moment in the movie when that happened. So, yeah. But other than that, I really don't have anything to add. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with something, but then it would just feel like we're, stretching this out for time, and that's not what I'm about. So, did you have anything else?
No, I don't got much else to say about that.
That's all I've got to say about that.
That's all I got to say about that. So let's.
All right. So, if you did own this, where would you put it on your shelf?
Oh, I hate to say it because it's so obvious, but it would go in general population. Because I mean, if I did like this movie, and again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but if it was my cup of tea and I liked it, it's a typical conventional movie. I mean, it's just a storytelling, which is good. Good storytelling. I like that, but it's nothing. There's nothing overly special about it.
Yeah, there's nothing that makes this movie terrible. There's just nothing, in my opinion, that makes it terribly great. So I'm gonna have to agree with you. General population, smack in the middle of the third row, to use what I usually use, and it's a movie that exists. And again, I don't even remember how it got there. And I had to ask my wife. So I didn't even know that if I hadn't got it the way I guess we got it, that I would even really go out of my way to own it, unless it was, like I said, in the bargain bin. I'm like, oh, I remember that. That wasn't too bad. And I had a few extra dollars burning a hole in my pocket. I do like Rene Russo, so that would have been an attractor for me to watch this movie. But I don't know. Yeah, the general population. And to your position on the shelf, at least you didn't throw it in the trash this time, because I think there were a couple of movies that we've done where you said, yeah, this would go on the shelf nearest to the trash can, so it would be easier to knock it into.
Again, like I said, it's just not my cup of tea, but it was not a bad movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't go in the garbage.
Well, there you go then. And I think that's high praise, considering, how we pretty much, spoke about this movie for the most part. So, all right, so let's find out what we're watching next.
Chicken Run.
Chicken Run.
Okay.
Cool. All right. I remember that one. That's a movie that I own.
I do. I remember that.
Yeah, so I know we talked about this on the last episode, or I think maybe we talked about it offline. I don't remember about managing our responses to the movie selection to go, that's a movie that I own. So, like, yay, Chicken Run! Woo!
And the crowd goes wild.
Yay. Interjection for excitement. I'm still looking forward to the day when Schoolhouse Rock shows up, just so you know.
Okay.
And that'll just be a full-on homage to song and edutainment.
Yep.
So, with our next movie selected, listeners, you can contact us on the Facha Book page, which we've already read some listener feedback from. You can hit us up on the Twitter. You can leave us a voicemail at the phone number that is also in the show notes on the Facebook page and on the Twitter account. And if you are currently in jail and would like us to authorize it, let us know that you're specifically calling us through some other means, perhaps. Just say on the section where you're allowed to say your name, say actual caller. And, we'll try to make sure we monitor it so that we can actually, press 2 and let you call us and leave a voicemail. So other than that, take care of your medical grade braces and ensure that you've extended your car warranty. And Dan, your movie-themed goodbye is?
Why do men always insist on measuring their dicks? You don't like that one?
I don't have an answer for that. No, but that pretty much sums up this movie, so I'm perfectly cool with that. All right, so listeners, we will fill your ear holes in 2 weeks with Chicken Run.